Hi, boys and girls. This is Mrs. P, and I'm back with Amelia, Bedelia, and friends. Beat the clock, and on the video from last. Guy, it's been a couple weeks since I've read this. I've got several books going, and I think I listed it on YouTube as Chapter 7, but no, it was Chapter 6. So I went back and I fixed that. But now I'm going to read Chapter 7 for you. Chapter 7, there's a little picture. Tempus Fugabuttabuttabut. How would you pronounce that? Oh, forget about it. That's what it is. So Amelia Bedelia had promised to bring Pete, the owner of Pete's Diner, 4 dozen lemon tarts for his customers. She stopped by to make the delivery after school. Your tarts are the hottest item on the menu, said Doris, a waitress at the diner. Oh, you don't have to heat them up, said Amelia Bedelia. Well, okay, can I not get this right in the frame or what? Well, they're popular no matter what temperature, said Doris. I won't be able to make another delivery for a while, said Amelia Bedelia. I'll be busy making lots of lemon tarts for my school's birthday. You go to Oak Tree Elementary, right? Asked Pete. I sure do, said Amelia Bedelia. I went there too, said Pete, holding out his hand. Amelia Bedelia shook Pete's hand. In fact, my great-grandfather was the first principal, said Pete. You mean Peter Hoffman? Asked Amelia Bedelia. Pete was stunned. Oh, there's my old lady hand. Pete was stunned. How did you know that? He asked. I was named after him. My mother loved telling stories about my great-grandfather. He loved gardening and trees, and she told me that he always felt bad when the big old oak tree out behind the school died. It was huge. Ancient. I think she's going to get a clue. He planted a new one out front, grown from an acorn off the old one. What else do you remember about him, Pete? Asked Doris, cutting a little slice of lemon tart to taste. Well, I remember my mother telling me about his pocket watch, said Pete. He would let her press a button and the cover would flip open. She liked the face of the clock because it had big Roman numerals on it. The words Tempus Fugit were engraved on the inside. Is that who made the watch? Asked Amelia Bedelia. No, Tempus Fugit means time flies in Latin, said Pete. Way back when I was growing up, we all had to take Latin. You grew up speaking Latin, said Amelia Bedelia. Wow, you're much older than I thought. Did your mom and dad take you to the Coliseum to see the chariot races? It took a long time for Doris to stop laughing. She was still giggling when she put out a plate of French fries in front of Amelia Bedelia. These are on the house, said Doris, and if Pete, doesn't agree, I'll pay for them. I needed a good laugh today, and Doris walked away, wiping her eyes on her apron. Amelia Bedelia didn't know how French fries could be on the house, especially since she was in a diner, but she ate them all up anyway. These are hot and delicious, she called after Doris. Thanks. Okay, we've got, if this chapter 8 is short, we can read it. Chapter 8, Stumped. There were only 2 days left until Oak Tree Elementary's official 100th birthday. Ms. Hotchkiss updated everyone on the search for the time capsule during morning announcements. We hired some experts to help us find the time capsule. You've probably noticed them as they searched. I think I've got a clue. You probably noticed them as they have searched the area around our oak tree. They tell me that they used cutting-edge equipment. I am very sorry to tell you that they struck out. Struck out? Amelia Bedelia wondered why the experts were playing baseball when they should have been hunting for the time capsule. Also, what edge was the equipment cutting? We are stumped, added Mrs. Roman. Too bad they weren't looking for a stump, thought Amelia Bedelia. She knew right where to find one. After lunch, a gloomy bunch of kids gathered in the student lounge. Guess what? Our table is a year older than our oak tree, said Amelia Bedelia. She told her friends the story of Pete at the diner and Peter Hoffman and how the tree in front of the school had been started from an acorn and planted when the tree that was now their table had died. And they're thinking about the guy. According to the plaque next to the tree out front, it was planted in 1921, said Joy, and then she pointed to the edge of their table. That means that this outer ring of our table was growing during the year 1920. The way she moved her fingers was like a tiny person walking towards the center of the stump, counting as she went. 3, 4, 5, 6. Right here is 1914. World War I started here, said Joy. There? I thought it was in Europe, said Amelia Bedelia. Oh my gosh. Joy counted 2 more rings. This would be the year 1912. The Titanic sank here. Sank there, said Amelia Bedelia. It's not deep enough. There's no water at all. And the other kids just fell over laughing, but not Joy. This is where the Titanic sank in time, said Joy. See this ring? That is how big this tree was when the Titanic sank. And Joy's fingers took 12 more teeny tiny steps toward the center of the stump. Right here, it's the year 1900, she said. The turn of the last century. Want to keep going back into the 1800s? Sure, said Amelia Bedelia and her friends. Lead on, said Clay. Your fingers are like little time travelers walking back into history. So Joy's fingers took more steps. Here we are in 1876 when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. Her fingers kept marching. She paused every so often to call out historical events, like stops on a train or a bus. Too soon, the recess bell rang and everyone started lining up to go in. Hurry, Joy, said Amelia Bedelia. Go to the center ring and tell us what was going on when this tree was planted. Walking her fingers as fast as she could, Joy continued counting the years out loud and backwards. This is 1865, she called out, the end of the Civil War. Keep going, said Amelia Bedelia as Joy's fingers did their dance. At last, she got to the center of the stump. 1776, Joy tapped the stump and smiled. The Declaration of Independence, shouted Amelia Bedelia and her friends. Cool, said Clay. All this time, we thought we were just sitting around on an old stump. Turns out it's a slice of history. Thanks, Joy. Back in the classroom, Clay explained to Mrs. Shock, and the other kids how Joy had turned the stump into a time machine. And Joy was her usual self, sitting quietly at her desk with her nose in a book. She wasn't bragging, which was what Amelia Bedelia liked most about her. Joy loved discovering fun facts about the world. She was the absolute best at history. That was just a fact. Like the names and places and dates she had memorized, those were a joy to her. Joy was a joy to Amelia Bedelia. She was super happy that Joy was her friend. But right now, Amelia Bedelia could tell that something was bothering Joy. Her forehead was wrinkled and she stared off into the distance, studying the giant oak outside their classroom window. Amelia Bedelia almost never passed notes in class, but she was worried enough to send one to Joy. Amelia Bedelia folded it up, passed it to Penny, who passed it to Clay, who passed it to Angel, who passed it to Joy. Amelia Bedelia saw Joy read it, write a reply, and send it back the same way. Amelia Bedelia's note would have made the round trip in record time in anyone else's classroom, but this was the home of the Hawk, and Mrs. Shock had spotted the note immediately. She waited for Joy to answer it, then pounced right as it was being handed back to Amelia Bedelia. The blood-red talons of the hawk snagged the note just before it got to Amelia Bedelia's outstretched hand. That note had as much chance as a baby bunny hopping across an open field at a raptor convention. Well, 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 what do we have here? Asked Mrs. Shock. Is this perhaps the secret recipe for Amelia Bedelia's lemon tarts? It could not be merely a note, because everyone knows that those are 100% banned in my class. Mrs. Shock unfolded the paper and quickly read the message. Joy and Amelia Bedelia, come to the front of the room, please. The two friends stood up and slunk to the front of the room and then turned to face the class. "The note started with you, Amelia Bedelia," said Mrs. Shock. "Please tell us what was so important that you had to break my number 1 rule." She dropped the note into Amelia Bedelia's outstretched palm and then took a seat at Amelia Bedelia's desk. "I sent this to Joy because she looked so sad." "And what does the note say?" said Mrs. Shock. Amelia Bedelia cleared her throat. "Are you okay? Now please pass the note to Joy so she can share her reply with the entire class," said Mrs. Shock. "I wasn't feeling sad. I was thinking," said Joy. "I thought of something on the playground and I just now figured it out." "Can it be used as a fun fact?" asked Clay. The whole class laughed. Mrs. Shock laughed too. "Oh, thank goodness for Clay," thought Amelia Bedelia. Joy turned the piece of paper over to read what she had written on the back. Amelia Bedelia perked up. She was looking forward to hearing the message she never got. Joy cleared her throat twice and read, "I figured out where the time capsule is buried." "Yes!" yelled Clay. "That's the funnest fact ever!" Mrs. Shock's hawk-like eyes opened wide and then narrowed to slits. "Well, I was going to send you both to the principal's office," she said. "But now I think Mrs. Hotchkiss should come down here." She stood up, walked to the phone, and called the office. Everyone heard her say, "Hello, Mrs. Roman? Is Miss Hotchkiss?" Before Ms. Shock turned her back to the class, she whispered for 20 seconds into the phone and then hung up. Mrs. Shock perched on top of her desk. No one said a word. The only sound was 2 pairs of shoes walking quickly, never running, toward their classroom, growing louder and louder and sharper with each clickety-clack, click-clack, click-clack, clickety-clack, click-clack. And there we stop, and we'll come back with Chapter 9. See you later.